Thank you for joining me on LexsyCrafts. My name is Lexy, and today we are making a map. I did the real-time version of this earlier today, and now I'm doing the sped-up version. The real-time version took about an hour, and this one takes about 10 minutes, just so you can get the quick and dirty overview of what the map, or how to make the map. This time I added some fun stuff in the water, so let's get mapping. I use an H pencil because it's light enough to where I don't have to erase too much, but dark enough to show up on camera, which is really, really nice. I use six-sided dice. Ones and twos represent mountains, and I put a little M for each of those. Threes and fours represent forests, and I put a little F for those. Five and sixes are water. I leave those blank because that's going to be ocean. We're going to do continents and islands on this map, no lakes. So I'm just going through, removing the dice, and put in a little F or an M wherever needed. And this footage is at 5 times speed. Most of the footage is at either 5 times speed or 10 times speed to get this done nice, quick, and dirty. So next up, I'm going to use my 03 Sakura Micron pen, and I'm going to outline the islands. And I just follow wherever my little letters are and kind of gauge how far apart they are as to whether I want it to be a little island on its own or a bigger island or a continent. And that's what helps make weird shaped islands and continents and things like that. Um, and I don't follow the lines very tightly on some of the islands. I do it pretty loosely so I have more space there. And the more wiggly you make the coastline, the more zoomed out you are. And the same with mountains. If you do small mountains, here I'm showing you the big version of what I'm doing. The smaller you make your mountains, the more zoomed out you are. So with world maps, that's one trick that you can do is make your coastline really jagged and then also make your mountains very small. And that makes your map more zoomed out. So you can technically add more stuff there and your scale, like you can do 1 inch is 100 miles if you wanted to, and nobody would bat an eye. So here I'm representing a volcano, and I put a little volcano in, followed by a bunch of mountains. You want to use mountains in a range. Don't put a mountain on its own. That's pretty unrealistic. But I make lots of mountain ranges. I love making mountains. So next up, I do puffy little cloud-like forests. And I'm still using my 03 here. And each little F is its own forest, just like each little M was its own mountain range. Over on the right-hand side, I will show you me joining a bunch of forests together to make one giant forest. That's something that you can definitely do. It's up to you. It's your map. I do it in some areas, but in some areas I like having little forests, like little flecks of woods. So now I'm making my settlements. Ones are tribes, twos are cities, threes are forts, fours are schools, fives are prisons, and sixes are either dungeons or ruins. And each one has its own symbol. And I do these in a Sakura Micron pen in a red. It's a 01 size. The red helps them stand out a bit more, especially the tribes, because they are a filled in triangle. They look a lot like mountains. I run a D&D campaign, and one of my friends didn't know that there was a tribe down there. Actually, I don't think any of them realized that it was a tribe because it was in a mountain range and it was dark, and I shade in my mountains. So I can't blame them that they didn't know it was down there. But yeah, I'm just putting in a bunch of little settlements, and I use dice for this so that I don't really have to think about it. Next up, I'm going to underline the coastline. Technically, you could stop your map here before you underline the coastline, and you have a very workable map. There's nothing wrong with having a map like this, but from here on out, the more little details that you do, the more your map is going to pop and look cooler. So here I'm using an 08 pen. It is a thicker pen, just to underline all of my islands and continents, and it just makes your map pop just a little bit more. It's basically as if you took each island and continent and moved it up by about a millimeter, and you're just putting shadow for it. I learned this technique from WASD20 here on YouTube. It's just a really simple technique that you can do, and I mean, it makes your map look cooler, in my opinion. Um, Especially if you're going for that hand drawn style, which I hope you are because you're hand drawing your map. But it's a little tedious, but it's over quicker than you realize, especially if you don't have a ton of mountains or a ton of islands. More islands, more underlining. So next up, I'm using my O3 and I'm shading in my mountains on the right hand side. There's different types of ways to shade mountains. You can take your pencil and flick it down and do little bits of shading that way, or you can take your pencil on the left hand side of the mountain and flick it to the right, and that's another way to shade it. I like doing this type of shading because it's more well, first off, I like it this way, but also this is more of a Tolkien way of shading mountains. Some of his maps have mountains shaded like this in The Hobbit and in Lord of the Rings, and I thought that was really, really cool. So I kind of just followed his style. There's nothing wrong with following someone else's style. Um, Especially if you've tried other types of styles. Like if you find something that works for you, even though you've like taken it from someone else, still use it for your own. I mean, there's no shame in it. We all steal as artists. So next up, I'm going to use my 005, and it's a really, really thin pen, and I'm going to do my forests. More treetops in a forest, the denser packed it is. Less treetops, it's less densely packed. And I do this after I do the settlements just so I have room in those forests for my settlements. Um, if I did this first, I wouldn't be able to have a lot of room for different cities and stuff in there. And for the tree trunks, I am just taking my pen and I'm flicking it down really quickly and rapidly and moving to the right hand side from left to right. Um, you might think it looks like shading, but there's actually spaces in between each of those. So next up, I am making my key. I'm using my O8 for this, and I do the symbol on the left hand side, and then I write what it represents on the right hand side. I do not represent the volcano in the key. You can if you want, but I didn't. And you can outline your key, like put it in a box. That looks quite neat, but I did not do that for this one. So next up, I'm going to add some stuff in the water. I'm going to do a whirlpool here. I do little squiggly lines in quick succession in a spiral, and that makes a whirlpool. And then I take my pencil in the upper left-hand corner, and I'm going to draw out a little sea creature. I like to draw them out first because sometimes they look a little derpy or a little adorable, and I wanted it to not look derpy or adorable because I want it to look like a menacing sea creature. Still working on that because they still look a little derpy or adorable. And now I'm adding tentacles over here, and I draw like a little jagged, uh, really thin mountain basically, and I add squiggles underneath it to represent water. I put a line, and on one side of the line, I put a bunch of little dots to represent suckers.